I dated my wife for 5 years before proposing marriage, which I've been told is a long time. Repeatedly, by my wife. I'm a cynical guy, and that makes me hard to love. I always thought the most common wedding proposal was, "You're what?" I didn't know that there was a timeline or that women expect you to propose after a year or two of dating. I knew that I always wanted to marry my wife, Nicole, but there was always something in the way. We weren't living together, then she was in grad school, and then there were our families. When we first started dating, I was living with my brother, which was an issue for Nicole. My brother's wildly inappropriate, and he doesn't understand social cues. Before Nicole would come over, I had to literally remind him that his shorts had to be longer than his penis. For our first Christmas, her sister called me on the phone and she sang me Feliz Navidad. And I was like, "Why are you singing me this song?" And she said, "I'm sorry, I heard you were ethnic." For our first Thanksgiving, Nicole's work prevented her from going home to see her family. So I asked my mom if she could come to Thanksgiving dinner. Now, my mom takes the holidays very seriously, and she told me that she didn't think we'd been dating long enough for her to consider it to be serious. Now, I'm kind of a mama's boy, so I didn't put up much of a fight. So Nicole had Thanksgiving dinner by herself. And because Cracker Barrel is too expensive at the time for her, she went to O'Charlie's, which is kind of like going to a soup kitchen for Thanksgiving dinner, but they bring you a bill at the end. Meanwhile, her family was coming to terms with the prospect of incorporating a large, sensitive Chinese man into their family. Nicole's father, Mike, is a retired Marine Master Sergeant. Mike dislikes things like taxes and the homosexual agenda. I'll tell you one story about my relationship with Mike. One year around Christmas, Nicole went to her hometown Harley-Davidson store to get her father a Christmas present. And the clerk behind the counter recognized her last name, and he said, "Are you one of my foreman's little girls?" And she said, "Yes." "Are you Jennifer, or the one dating the Chinese pussy?" And I viewed this as progress because at least Mike wasn't calling me a pussy to my face anymore. Now, although I'm a cynic, I'm also a failed romantic. I like to create grand romantic gestures and watch them disintegrate before my eyes. One year for Valentine's Day, I did that box inside of a box thing. You know, I got a bunch of presents and I put one of them in a big box and then another one inside a smaller box inside that box, and so on until there was a really small box in the center of all the boxes. Now, I've been told that this is an incredibly lame idea, repeatedly, by my wife. But what I didn't realize is that this is a very cliched way that some men propose marriage. Inside one of the boxes was a Russian nesting Matryoshka doll that I encouraged her to open. And upon opening all the dolls, she discovered they were absolutely devoid of any jewelry whatsoever. And I said, "See, it's a doll inside a doll, inside a box inside of a box." And I knew I had done a good job because she was crying so hard. And rather than justifiably leaving me at that very moment, she foolishly opened the last and smallest box to discover a gift certificate to my favorite Mexican restaurant. Or as I like to think of it, promise tacos. Well, as the years marched on, I sensed it was getting time to propose because every time we would go to the mall, Nicole would take me to all the jewelry stores. So I decided that I would go ring shopping just to poke my toes in the water. I went by myself, which was a mistake. You see, when a couple goes ring shopping together, they're looking for a token of their love that she can appreciate forever. But when a man goes ring shopping by himself, he negotiates with a stranger to determine the cash valuation of a significant other. It's like finding a price for sex with a hooker that lived through the Depression. The first place I went was a fancy local jewelry store. I was greeted at the front door by this gorgeous young woman in like a cocktail dress. Her name was Candy. I told her I was looking for an engagement ring, and she took me to this special marbled off area. Then this salesman comes oozing over. "Hi, I hear you're looking for a diamond engagement ring. How many carats are you looking for?" Well, the internet tells me I should be more concerned with clarity. Sure it does. Take a look at some rings I picked out. No ring was less than 2 carats or $20,000. I don't know. My girlfriend's pretty petite. These rings might be too big for her. Too big? Too big? Candy. Candy comes bouncing over. Candy, can it ever get too big? Oh, no, of course not. So, of course, the first thought in my head is, wow, Candy's a filthy whore. But then I'm like, this guy's trying to make me feel inadequate so that I overcompensate and buy a bigger ring. But what these salespeople don't know about me is that my life has been dominated by a vicious cycle of inadequacy and overcompensation. That's my wheelhouse. So I got up and left. This wasn't going to be my gym membership all over again. But despite my experiences buying the ring, I got more and more into finding the ring, and as a byproduct, more and more into the prospect of actually proposing. The year that I proposed, Nicole spent the entire month of January in a writer's colony in Vermont, and I came up with a grand plan to fly up to Vermont, surprise her, and propose in my hometown of Williamstown, Massachusetts. Now, I hadn't been there in 15 years, but I had always idealized winter in New England. Frozen brooks, birch trees, softly snowing. That's how I remembered it. So I wasn't sure where to propose, and I asked my brother if he had any ideas. And he immediately suggested that I propose at the foot of our father's grave. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go goth with the whole thing, so I told him that'd be my plan B. So without a spot picked out, I flew up to Vermont, and when I met up with Nicole, she was completely surprised. And better yet, she had no idea what I was planning due to the aforementioned 5 years of crushing disappointment. I told her that I was going to take her down to an art museum in Williamstown, but what I didn't tell her was that I was going to propose to her on this huge stone bench I remembered from my childhood that was on this hill behind the museum. So we go down and we look at the art, and then I tell her I want to go for a walk. So we trudge up this hill with 2 feet of snow. It's like -17 degrees. And when we get to the bench, I realize that I was either much, much smaller as a child, or my ass has unfurled itself like a flower in a Georgia O'Keeffe painting. So now I don't know where to go. I'm nervous and I'm kind of flipping out and trying to figure it out on the fly. So I take her to this beautiful vista I remember, and now they're condos. And then I take her to this house I grew up in where my father had planted a beautiful garden, and now it's a parking lot. On the outside, I'm trying to stay calm, but in my head, I'm freaking out. Does she know what's going on? Where am I going to propose? Does she think I'm the lamest tour guide ever? Finally, in desperation, I remember one last place. So as we're standing over the foot of my father's grave, it occurs to me that maybe this isn't a good idea. So I gave up, and we started leaving town. And as we were driving out of town, we passed this little forest I grew up next to. And I told Nicole I wanted to stop and walk around and go for another walk. She looks at me and says, "Another one?" I'm like, "Just for a minute, just to look around." So we go into the forest, and off to the side of the trail, I see this moss-covered rock off to the side. And I tell her I want to have a seat. So we trudge in the snow, and we sit down on the rock. And as we're sitting there, I realize the rock is overlooking a ravine with a frozen brook. And we're surrounded by birch trees. It's absolutely silent. And at that very moment, it starts to softly snow. Nicole snuggles up closer to me and says, "This has been the best day of my entire life." That instant, that moment, is one of my most cherished memories. It's like a photograph I never get tired of looking at. To this day, it amazes me that somebody so brilliant and beautiful would be such a sucker to marry a guy like me. A few months ago, we celebrated the 5-year anniversary of that day, and in 3 weeks, we celebrate our 5th wedding anniversary. But if you ask my wife, she'll tell you, she deserves credit for all 10.